All right, recording has started, and this is the February 6th, 2025 Crossplane community meeting. The biggest news, well, I don't know if it's the biggest, V2 is pretty big, but one of the biggest things going on right now is that we got the release candidate build out just a couple days ago for V1.19. So thank you again, Mark, for helping out with that. Mark is our release manager for the 1.19 release. And so we definitely appreciate Mark helping out in running that release build to get us a release candidate to start testing. So let's go ahead and talk through what is in the 1.19 release, talk through some of the release notes and things to pay attention to so that we all kind of have a good understanding of what's going on and what to expect. And then this is certainly an invitation for folks to start testing and try out your scenarios in non-production environments and give us any feedback on that release as well. All right, so the 1.19 release candidates. We have explicit instructions on how to go ahead and install this in your environment, just like we do for every RC build that we do. Let's walk through some of the notable changes here. So first, the usage API it's been promoted to beta. It's now enabled by default. So you don't have to set any feature flags or do anything to turn on the usage API. That is there and available all by default. Bob, I think I did see your name, right? Bob, you're here. Bob, you look like you had some interesting ideas about the whole replay deletion value. And I was talking about like documenting it, but you might have some ideas about implementation still, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it occurred to me as I was reviewing that, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me at the time when we actually implemented it. But yeah, I mean, the replay deletion stuff, I think, only really makes sense when the usage is in a composite, with a buy resource. And so I'm not sure it even makes sense to do replay deletion if you're not in a composite and if you don't have a buy resource, right? If you're just using it as a locking mechanism. So maybe it makes sense to refactor that a little bit. And I know we can still do that in beta.
Mm.
So I guess there's probably no rush to get it done before 119 goes out, but I think that might maybe resolve that problem. I want to talk about it with Hassan more and see what makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah, that's and you got to exactly what I wanted to get to there, Bob, is that we're promoting it to beta. The replay deletion stuff is fairly important. And if this was something that was like, hold on, this will be like an API change or something that would be breaking or something like that, then we would figure that out before we ship it. But if we've got some time to think about it, talk to Hassan, and then it's not like something that we'd be breaking later on, then that sounds really good to me.
Yeah, I think it's more a tightening of the scenario that it would apply to. You know what I mean? Because I mean, I agree with Hassan. It doesn't make sense to replay deletion when, so that when you delete the thing, it just magically this other resource gets deleted out of thin air with no warning. I think it only makes sense when there's another resource sitting there waiting to be deleted, the composite, um, which is what we're really the scenario we're trying to handle.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Cool. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll follow up on that then. Awesome. And then the other API promotion to beta this time was for server-side apply on claims. So this has been baking for a few milestones, and it seems to have been working very well for folks. I did want to call out something specifically, though, that this is a definite improvement and it fixes a number of bugs that we have with you changing values in a claim, adding labels or changing arrays or removing a field or something like that. When you make those changes there, syncing that to the XR before server-side apply could result in some undesirable behavior, basically where those changes would not get synced essentially. So now that this claim server-side apply is on by default in 1.19, you don't have to do anything to opt into it. This will just be the default behavior. I think it's important to call out that, hey, these undesirable behavior, these bugs that existed before will no longer happening. So we expect pretty much most everybody to have a benefit, a net benefit of, cool, these bugs won't happen anymore. They're a pain in the butt for a lot of people. That's a good thing. But if for some reason somebody within their composition was relying on these bugs as part of the behavior that they wanted, I don't think haven't heard that case, but if somebody was relying on this behavior, then this would impact them. So I want to call that out and make sure that people are aware of that. And so check these release notes here and kind of understand this a little bit better if you think that might apply to you. But I doubt that. Then some other awesome features here. Super thank you for the patience it took to get configurable ports in. So Crossplane has the ports that it uses for like webhooks, metrics, communication with functions and all that sort of stuff. They're essentially hard-coded for a long time. And so if you're running in a scenario where you need to use host network, such as like you're in EKS and you have like the CNI for Amazon and for the master nodes, whatever, separate from the CNI that you have for your worker nodes, and you need to run in host network to be able to communicate, etc. Then those hard-coded ports would cause conflicts, and it just literally did not work. So for that scenario there, we got a great contribution from the community to be able to basically configure Crossplane's ports to say, hey, for metrics, use this port, for webhook, use this port, etc. So that has been merged, and that's part of the release as well. So if you run in this type of scenario, the one I hear about it all the time is with EKS, basically. Then that is something that will help you out a lot too. We in 1.18 we added some logic to be able to automatically manage dependencies and upgrade them over time, etc. And then for 1.19, we've added an optional behavior to be able to, in addition to automatically upgrading packages, downgrade them if needed to meet whatever version constraints are in the cluster. So that's optional. That's not default behavior. If folks want to try that out then too, then that's something that'll be available in 1.19. Another great contribution from the community was that the Crossplane CLI commands didn't work very well for talking to private repos. So like render and validate, they need to pull down packages. If those are in private repos, there's a lot of scenarios they just didn't work. There wasn't support for that. So now those work fairly reliably across a number of different environments, like for a Docker client or a Podman, different types of container registries and stuff. So thank you very much for adding that in, because that's a lot of people were asking for that, and I think that'll be a big improvement. And then finally, the last big highlight to call out is that we took the time, I've talked about this before in the community meeting, we took the time to figure out how to properly promote APIs, alpha, beta to GA, and make sure that we're not breaking folks and preventing the ability to upgrade and downgrade across various versions of Crossplane. So we now have that captured in a contributor guide as well. So anybody promoting APIs in Crossplane will be able to benefit from that and make sure we're doing it with a good process there, basically. So that's everything I know of, the big stuff for 1.19. So yeah, please do take a spin, take a test spin here. There's a number of changes in the release there. And if folks want to try it out and report all your issues or anything that you see, then now's the time to do it. We'll take critical bug fixes right now before the release that we expect to be on Tuesday. So a few more business days left before that. But if we see any showstoppers, we'll make sure to fix them. We're in code freeze. We're not expecting to take regular fixes or certainly not features. But if we see any showstoppers, let us know and we can get those fixed.
Hey, Jared.
Yep.
What do you think about getting the fix for 6261, the unstructured resource leaking
Oh, the cache.
the cache issue?
Good question. And I think Nick was reviewing that one pretty heavily with you. So I'd probably defer to him on that one. But my initial instinct was that has like the rewrite that's being done, not rewrite, but the refactoring and stuff might have a little more risk that I'm super comfortable with. But the severity of the issue is a bit high as well. So I'll let you and Nick kind of figure that one out.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Nick,
think
what do you think?
my review was mostly just style, if I recall correctly. So I feel pretty good. And given the severity, I can't imagine it's going to get any worse with Bob's fix. So I'm all good to go ahead with that.
Okay, great. that sounds good then. I did not look at the changes. I just saw the description of them, and it looked like that would be a bit more churn than I wanted. So that's cool if it's more of a stylistic change than it is a functionality change.
Yeah, I mean, we're preserving the cache now in the default case, and only basically we're doing a second read with a non-cached client when the initial read fails.
Yeah, just
Awesome.
I'm not saying Bob's changes were stylistic. I'm saying my feedback
Right.
PR was stylistic, but Bob's change is fairly targeted. Like he says, just plotting one extra client down to one specific use case.
Yep. And what was the that PR, Bob?
6261, I think.
Okay. Let me click on 6261. You're one of those number folks, aren't you?
I pulled it up earlier, so I wouldn't
Some
be
people
looking
just
for it.
recite by number all the time, and I'm like, how do you guys do that? Unstructured. Let's get this merged, and then we'll have to backport it to 1.19 branch. Awesome. That's great to know that. Okay. So we walked through all the big features for release. Those were in the release notes, so we've got nothing to add here. So I have not really started planning for 1.20, kind of coming in hot, flying by the seat of our pants for 1.19 a little bit here. So I don't have a good plan for what's going on in 1.20 just yet. But I will certainly, do folks already have kind of off the top of their head here, do folks have some ideas around big things they want to see or fixes, et cetera, that they would love to see in 1.20, so we can take that as an input source?
I know we've been looking more at using configurations, and I suspect that there's some API or management or improvements that we could use in terms of being able to deploy configurations and pass through like provider configuration, function configuration from the, I know there's issues around configurations being able to deploy into an environment and be configured for that particular environment. So
Is that the initialization XRs? Does that
that could be,
that handles
yeah.
that scenario, I think, right? It's kind of like, hey, here's a configuration. Now make sure it's got everything it needs, provider config and everything set up, so that it works in a complete way for this environment.
Yeah, that may be something I might take a look at for 20.
Oh, cool. XRs. Cool. All right, then let's keep on moving forward here. Let's see, is anyone from the focuses on providers on the call here today? I think not. Yeah. All right, so I'll just mention this briefly here. So obviously a bunch of providers updated here. There's definitely been a theme of CVEs and vulnerabilities, et cetera, in our Golang dependencies over the last couple of months. I can think of like 4 or 5 of those. So a number of functions have been updated to make sure that CVEs are getting addressed in a timely manner, et cetera. So you can check out release notes of various different providers and functions here that have been updated recently. There's also a new a GitHub provider, a GitHub release as well, that had kind of a big expansion of the coverage that it supports. So that was actually really cool. I think there was some effort from another GitHub provider that then kind of got pulled into this one here that was donated to Crossplane Contrib. So it seemed like the functionality in that GitHub provider there expanded significantly. So that's pretty cool to see. And I think that's it for providers that I have here. So let's keep moving forward here to the community topics. As always, got a few different content things here. Obviously, Crossplane V2 is a hot thing on the table right now. Nick had a little blog post to go along with the proposal there. There's a number of webinars that I've seen recently and presentations, et cetera. The CNCF is doing one. I think it's coming up in March, I believe. Let me just click on this and see what we get. Yeah, March 20th. So dang, they plan far in the future. That is more than a month away. I'll check on that another time. but that's it's cool to see the CNCF doing a webinar about introducing Crossplane to more folks within the community there. And then there's some cool stuff that the Microsoft documentation team was adding into their documentation on how to manage resources and provision them with Crossplane too. If anyone else has other blog posts or videos and stuff, feel free to drop a link in here and we'll get that into this agenda doc as well. Okay, I did want to give an update here because we talked about this last time, and then in our regular steering committee meeting, we got to talk and discuss it. So there had come up amongst the community that the old provider GCP and provider Azure providers from many years ago, they're not staying up to date. They don't have a maintainer team that's active. They're essentially abandoned, and they're kind of causing more confusion and more harm than they are doing good. So in general, the steering committee talked about this in our last meeting, and we came to a consensus that it's a better path to be clear about the status of providers and like how actively they're maintained and whatnot. And what that means then is if there's not an active maintainer team or there's nobody to keep moving a provider forward, then it's best to be very clear about that status there and archive the project essentially. So I think we need to do a better job about that instead of leaving something completely languished for a couple of years, let's say, to just go ahead and archive it and be clear about it and point people towards more active providers instead. That said, I think we need to do that in a cautious, sort of sensitive way where, we should try to get active maintainers back, or try, if somebody wants to contribute to it, we can, empower them to be active on it. But if a provider is not making any progress, then we need to be very clear about that. So I think Azure is definitely in that boat. Someone from the GCP team had some interest in provider GCP. I haven't heard much about that in the last week or so, though. So we'll revisit that. But basically, we need to be clear about this and do a better job. Okay, so let's talk about V2 now. Nick is here, and Nick has been thinking through this proposal, and been doing a fantastic job on it. Let's do a quick recap for everybody so folks can kind of catch up with what the overall proposal is. I think this blog post does a decent job of that ish. So basically, like we have a number of years on the project. We've learned some better ways that we can make the project a little bit easier to use, and also be able to not just be focused on infrastructure, but be focused on applications as well. And a couple of like the key changes for that are that all by default resources would be namespaced as opposed to cluster scoped within the Crossplane control plane. In addition, you've been fairly tight and rigid about the types of resources you can compose together with Crossplane. And we're making in this proposal here, be able to expand that to be able to compose basically anything, not just, manage resources that are surfaced or exposed by Crossplane providers and have a very strict definition and, the Crossplane resource model, et cetera, but being able to expand that to all types of different resources. And then also claims become obsolete or no longer needed at that point. If composite resources are namespaced by default, then claims are just a namespace version of a composite resource essentially. So those get removed basically. So this makes Crossplane it covers a lot more scenarios and being able to capture and model and manage applications as well. And let me bring this proposal up on the screen here, because there's a lot of discussion on it. And I wanted to give the opportunity to folks to talk through some of this in real time as well, because I think we've got some heavy discussions on this so far. Yeah, let me go ahead and open the floor, because I know we have a lot of people here that are participating in this. So does somebody want to go ahead and start for any discussion or topics that they on this PR here and this proposal that they want to explore together?
I'll jump in real quick and just say that I am seeing everyone's feedback. I am somewhat intentionally leaving the threads open for a little while before jumping in just to let the feedback build up a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. All right, let's let me dive into like a couple of these then, just to see if that kind of gets the gears rolling here. There was a couple that I thought were fairly interesting. Where was it? Well, yeah, it looked like they were getting there was definitely some feedback about that whole removing claims thing. And I think that might have been and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, if there's some other reasons for it. But I feel like some of that was what's the right word here? Some of that was a potential misunderstanding or miscommunication. You know, I'm a fairly big believer that claims are really are namespaced projections, let's say, of composite resource. So I've heard some folks that don't want to remove claims because that's an object that works well for their abstractions, for exposing it to their users, etc. But I think that's potentially just a misunderstanding that that's exactly what composite resources do. So you don't really lose anything by removing claims at this point. And Nick, did you just see anything further than that of like, hey, are there some valid concerns for removing claims that you've seen so far in the feedback?
I mean, if you think about what claims do, you're right that they are a namespace proxy for an XR. They have some subtle distinctions, right? One thread that we've worked through with primarily Bob was that the claim has a novel feature. I don't think we really intended it to be this, but it has a novel feature where you can force the deletion policy foreground or background. So you can force everything to delete foreground, which means wait for all of the composed resources and XR to be deleted before sort of deleting the parent resources like the XR, the claim, etc. This is, something that's normal in Kubernetes, but there's relatively few resources that kind of let you set up policy such that no matter what the user does, it gets deleted that way. So this is one thing that Bob pointed out, that if we remove claims, we would not have that anymore. But then, as this common thread mentions, we found a way to enforce this using policy, using a validating admission webhook, or validating admission policy. So we think that might be good enough. Another difference, right, is just that claims are somewhat more. The status tends to be a little bit more abstracted than an XR, right? So like the XR, when we're running the composition function pipeline, for example, and we run into errors, the errors might be quite advanced and detailed, we dump them in the status of the XR. So one advantage of claims is that it doesn't necessarily show those detailed errors, but that's at the same time, it really depends on your perspective. So many people tell us, oh, it's a pain that I have to follow the claim to the XR to see those issues, right? So it's a bit of a trade-off there. I don't know if that's, it's a pro and a con. Another thing that people have pointed out, which is related to this, is that it sounds like some teams have a policy of just saying, my platform users get access to all RBAC types in their namespace, whatever, or all types, RBAC access to anything in their namespace. If it's namespace, they can do it. If it's not namespace, they can't do it. And so in that world, it's less about claims versus XRs, but in this world, if managed resources become namespaced, then those teams either have to be okay with their users being able to directly create managed resources in those namespaces, or have to change to a more granular RBAC policy for their users. I mean, my personal, I was a little surprised to hear this. My personal recommendation would be to have that more granular RBAC policy in the first place, rather than just kind of allowing teams star to their namespaces. But it is more work for teams to do that. So those are the three things that come to mind to me. At the end of the day, everything's a trade-off, and I do think that removing claims simplifies the system. So I haven't heard personally any feedback yet that convinces me that keeping claims in Crossplane v2 is the right thing to do. I still lean towards removing them.
Can I add one more comment? Because I've been using Crossplane for a little bit, but before that, I used to contribute work along other orchestration companies, and the claim or the composition is well, it's easy to draw a equation between a claim and an intent, or like essentially this whole composition can be more understood. It's with its meaning, it's closer to a concept of a blueprint rather than a resource itself. So I know we are just playing with words, but it will be easier to understand the meaning, well, easier to grasp the concept by new people. So is it possible to I'm not suggesting to rename, but at least like introduce like a wording of an intent or a blueprint into the composition resource, because the composition resource also well, you can add additional logic that will make all of this XR a bit more complicated, like more comprehensive. So yeah, maybe that's a good idea.
I didn't really understand the ask. Are you saying intent or blueprint? And are you saying we should rename claims to intent or blueprint? Or
we rename the XR to intent, for example?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to do that. There may be benefits to doing that, but I think that that's a pretty big change to sort of take a concept and give it a different name. There would have to be a pretty significant benefit to counterweight the churn of teaching everyone, okay, an XR is now called this, and we have XRDs. It's all like, it would be a big change to rename a concept entirely like that. To be fair, you know, removing claims is a big change as well, but I think we would need to see obviously super massive impact from that. And I'm not sure that personally renaming it to blueprint or something like that would be a valuable enough change. I'm not saying it's not valuable, but it would have to be really valuable for us to name concepts.
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that thought, Patrick. We got a couple of other topics in the chat as well. Kevin, do you want to talk through your ideas about a DAG, or do you want me to read it off the chat? I'll go ahead and read it then. So Kevin brought up an idea that is interested in. Oh, cool. Kevin's got to get a mic. Yes, I'll start reading it then, Kevin, and then you can come in to fill in some gaps. So one thing that I've heard this come up before as well, and so it might be appropriate for you too, might not. But Kevin is interested in a DAG, which, if I got it correct, that's a directed acyclic graph, correct? And that's really about kind of capturing the dependencies of who's using what, and you know, so you can kind of, if you have a good understanding of that, then you could have a good understanding of the ordering to create resources, you know, in the right order, and then deleting them and cleaning them up as well. We haven't had an explicit concept of modeling that in Crossplane before. There is no DAG. We've basically, you know, sort of there's references to, you know, what pieces of data that are used from one object to another, and then we can explicitly model a usage of one object by another, but it's not implicit, and then we kind of rely on eventual consistency to clean things up, or for the right things to come into place, you know, and waiting for it. And there's some function capability of sequencing orders of it too. So we've got a couple different areas around that. You want to pick it up from there, Kev?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if the mic works, and sorry for my very obvious French accent.
Oh, you're great. You're fine, Kevin.
Thank you. So yeah, you really hit the mark on the proposal. So the idea was initially when I looked at the V2 proposal, I took the opportunity to also think about other pain points. And there was a thread that I made on Slack on the general channel about pain points that related mainly to ordering. And after some discussion, we realized that most of the pain points related to the absence of such a graph, and also when discussing about the foreground deletion without claims. So right now, foreground deletion works because there's no owner reference from the claim to the XR. And with our discussion as to whether we would lose this feature. And the idea of using finalizers to order this and block this deletion, from what I understand, would again require Crossplane to know about the dependent resources of the composition. And so again, the graph. So I started thinking, I feel like this DAG is sort of the missing piece to unlock many pain points. And maybe a big V2 proposal was the appropriate place for that. But also, I don't want to push too hard on this because, like I said, I don't want to do a sort of a IPv6 effect where it became a big Santa wish list of things that people wanted to have, and it kind of killed the velocity of the upgrade. So I don't know if this is an appropriate topic for V2.
Yeah, well, I'm also very, and I appreciate you raising this, I'm also very sensitive to the IPv6 effect. What I would like to balance overall with the V2 proposal is if there are things that we can do in a backward compatible way, i.e., it appears as like a new field on a resource or a new feature on the existing APIs that users are already using. We don't have to couple that to V2. We could introduce features, in V1.20, 1.21, et cetera, et cetera. So I certainly would like to keep V2 sort of scoped to the things that kind of benefit from breaking changes for people, removing concepts. Although hopefully V2 won't be very breaking because it maintains all the V1 APIs. It does add a bunch of new V2 APIs, right? So yes, I'm also sensitive to, keeping an open mind, but not just making this thank God, it's the opportunity to have everyone pile on every feature they wanted from Crossplane, right? One of the things that is that I'm also sensitive to, right, is that I'm probably more sensitive to this than most. I'm not necessarily saying this is the goal of this proposal, but one of the most common criticisms of Crossplane is how complicated it is, right? So I would really hate to come out of this proposal and be like, oh, the complexity of Crossplane just doubled with V2, right? Like, hopefully it would actually get a little bit less even. On the graph thing specifically, there's actually two levels here, right? One is what can be done within a function. So if you take function patch and transform, for example, just because it's one that I'm familiar with. And let's say you've got that function and it's creating 5 resources and there is some kind of ordering dependency, one patches from another or something like that. It is actually possible in Crossplane today, I guarantee it, because I actually did it earlier this week in a proof of concept function, to just have a DAG, to have it figure out its references to everything else and just stage the ordered creation and deletion of things, right? For a function, there are, as I think you mentioned here, there are explicit versions of this, like function sequencer, where it says do these ones first and then these ones and then these ones. I know it's not an automatically inferred graph there, right? But it demonstrates that a function can order the creation of things and basically say, wait for these ones to be ready and then create these ones, et cetera, et cetera. So the only thing that's left there inside of a function is the implicit, calculation of what that order should be based on references. So in my mind, that's already possible in Crossplane, and it's not really a Crossplane V2 thing. It's more of someone writes a function that has that functionality, and if they want to do that, then that's great. I'm supportive of that. The harder technical thing to do is a DAG that is at the Kubernetes controller level, that isn't just saying this one controller, i.e. the function pipeline, will process a DAG internally and then make a series of operations according to that DAG, but instead the entire distributed system will coordinate with each other to make sure that things only happen in a specific order. So this could be like, a whole XR won't start creating something until some other resource in the system exists or has been deleted or whatever, right? That is much harder to do. That feels like almost outside of the scope of Crossplane and more of a Kubernetes problem. And in fact, it has come up in the context of should Kubernetes do this, especially for deletion ordering. Our usage type was intended to sort of help with this, I actually, this outside of 1XR kind of problem of maybe I have this one XR that creates a cluster, and then I have this other XR that's completely sort of decoupled from it. They don't really know about each other, except this one says you should go and put a Helm chart in that cluster, right? So we need to block the deletion of this. That's why we have usages. If all of those things were composed by the same XR, we wouldn't need usages. The XR could just say, I'm going to make sure I delete the function that the XR uses could just say, I'm going to make sure I delete the Helm chart and then later delete the cluster, right? So once you get outside the scope of one XR and you're coordinating across controllers that aren't really aware of each other, this becomes a very big and very hard problem. And it's one that people have asked Kubernetes to solve, and Kubernetes has basically said, we don't know if that fits with our sort of eventually consistent model, etc. So I'm pretty hesitant for Crossplane to jump in and say, we think we can solve this problem. Again, especially given the context that I think that it can already be solved within one XR, just for the composition job at the function layer.
Thank you very much for this detailed answer. And yeah, I agree with what you said, and I also agree that at least in my mind, the DAG ID was mainly inside one XR, not cross XR, because that's a whole can of worms. And fun fact, it's a bit too early for us to open source it and share it, but we use the function Python SDK, and we are slowly building up higher level abstractions on it, and we're thinking of open sourcing it. And one thing we are evaluating, trying to do, is actually building the graph inside the code and doing it ourselves before responding to Crossplane. I think for that to work, there's only one thing that is missing for us. Without the whole graph ID, will be the ID to mark a resource as pending of some sort. Like if we do an early return, or if we don't put a resource in the response, Crossplane assumes it does not exist at all. If we had this intermediary third state of saying, hey, Crossplane, know about this resource. For now, you don't know about it, but like auto-ready wouldn't mark everything as ready and stuff like that. I don't know if it was clear, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, when I experimented with this earlier this week, if you want to do an ordered create, right, you simply don't omit the dependent resources until their dependencies are ready. And you don't need to use something like auto ready to determine whether they're ready. The function could determine whether they're ready itself, right? So this is what I did, let's say subnet depends on VPC. The function emits the VPC, and if the subnet has like a reference to the VPC, then when that reference, when the VPC status, let's say when that field becomes available in the status, then okay, I have that data, and now I can go create the subnet, right? Then for deletes, it's kind of the inverse of that, and for updates, it's kind of a just completely omit the resource that isn't ready to be updated yet. You just update the previous state, and then you start emitting the updated state when the update's done. So I didn't find the need for some kind of sort of marker resource or anything like that while building this personally.
Yeah, I think there's actually an outstanding issue or difference, I guess I should say, between the way traditional patch and transform, even function patch and transform works, in terms of function patch and transform or traditional, both know how many resources to expect, right? They know the code knows it needs enough a particular number of resources, and it won't mark anything, won't mark the whole thing ready until it's done. With more programmatic, Go templating, any other sort of function where you're creating resources dynamically, and using function auto ready, the composite tends to go ready much, much earlier, even when there's resources that aren't, haven't been requested yet. So you get flapping of the composite readiness, where it's not really ready yet because all the resources, Crossplane didn't know about all the other resources that were going to be created. And I think that's kind of a fundamental issue maybe with composite readiness in general that we may need to look at.
Yeah, that's a good point. Someone had I think that there was a issue or a PR recently about allowing direct control of the XR's readiness from the function layer. So the way that it works today, if I recall correctly, is yeah, you emit n resources. A function, let's say, it emits 3 resources, and then for each of those 3 resources, the function can say, is it ready or not? But you're right that if the function says right now there's 3 resources and they're all ready, then the XR is going to say, well, great, the XR is ready then. But if the function actually had 10 more resources that aren't ready yet, it would be prematurely saying the XR is ready. So perhaps giving the function pipeline the ability to override that and just say, hey, let me control whether the XR is ready or not might be the way to go. But then you also need to figure out what if there's 4 different functions in the pipeline, right? How do they all coordinate together to agree on whether the XR is or isn't ready? Maybe.
Yeah, I actually pushed a PR to function auto ready, I think last week, maybe. Just adding an expected resource count attribute to it so that you could tell function auto ready, expect there to be 10 resources, and if there aren't 10 resources, mark the composite as not ready, right? So that because the function's marking the composite as not ready, Crossplane core won't touch it. It'll just leave it alone.
Is that true though? I was under the vague recollection that the XR field sort of somewhat confusingly because it's a shared protobuf type between composed resources and the XR. They're both just a type called resource at the protobuf level. I was under the impression that the XR's readiness field actually just gets ignored by Crossplane. It's only used for composed resource.
That could be. I'll have to go back. I did not have a chance to test it yet.
Separately from what you're talking about, I think someone had asked for that XR field to work, and I couldn't see any reason that that we could just actually be on it. So yeah, that's a good point. We probably need to do something about that. But that's a relatively small change, fortunately. So I could totally see that either going in V2 or just in V1.20 or whatever.
Sure.
So there's some more discussion in the chat as well. And it looks like there was kind of I'm not sure if there was some resolution there or feedback needs to be added to the proposal or more to talk about right now. But it looks like the Flux project is here with us today. Did you have anything that you wanted to, like the stuff you had in the chat, was any of that stuff you wanted to talk about synchronously right now?
I'm not exactly sure. So I have a process in my GitOps pipeline where I'm only permitting users to add claims. So there's a list of claims. So I think this might be easily solved just by curating a separate list of compositions instead and saying, well, now the compositions are the interface. I think that's the point of this part of the proposal, right?
Yeah, or XRs in this case. So composite resources, which under V1 is kind of like the thing directly behind the claim. You make the namespace claim, and then we make a cluster scope resource that's just exactly the same as the claim. So you today might, let's say you've got a type of claim that's called widgets, and then the convention would be for the XR behind that to be called X widgets. So widgets is namespace and X widgets is cluster scoped. Under this new proposal, we would just take that XR and say that's the namespace thing now, and it can just be called widgets. So you may not even need to change anything RBAC wise. You could just say your XR is now a namespace type that has the same group version of kind that you were previously using for the claim, and therefore your RBAC kind of just continues to work. Just kind of cuts out a layer of it.
So the challenge for me is I recommend, I'm not me personally, the Flux project recommends that when you create a tenant on the cluster, you grant them cluster admin in the namespace with a namespace cluster role binding. And the challenge for me is that managed resources becoming namespaced breaks this as a security completely. I can't use it anymore.
Yeah. I'm a little surprised by the idea of just saying users get access to star in a name, like every possible namespace resource namespace.
Users can never install custom resource definitions. That's the limitation. So that's the security boundary, basically. If we haven't installed, if the cluster admin at a cluster level hasn't installed a controller and a custom resource definition, then they can't be exploited through this mechanism. So the challenge for me is I can validate my list of compositions and make sure that if they're used, then every user who uses a composition can't trample on another user in another tenant namespace. It's just a much harder problem to solve when I can't. Do you see when I can't depend on managed resources being cluster scoped?
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally accept
Because
that.
they live in the real world, not on the cluster, right? So that's the reason why I saw them as being cluster scoped, and that's I'm imputing on just by learning Crossplane. I'm a new Crossplane learner, so
Yeah. You know, to be fair, it was me that made, you know, the argument that you're making now that like, oh, these are infrastructure-y things, so therefore they should be cluster scoped is an argument that I have made for years on Crossplane, and now I'm sort of reversing my position. It's more nuanced than that, right? I can say that we talked to Brian Grant, one of the architects of Kubernetes, about this years ago, and his take was, I regret anything being cluster scoped. Everything should have been namespaced. And I think you can also see, you can be like, okay, nodes are cluster scoped and persistent volumes are cluster scoped, but services and ingresses are, you know, namespaced, and you know, there's kind of a which ones are infrastructure, which ones aren't. Even in a way, like a pod is, you know, it's all configuring infrastructure kind of in a way, sort of. It's a, you know, blurred line, right?
if I'm being fair, I started learning Crossplane only about 3 months ago, and when I saw that managed resources were cluster scoped, I said, "What?"
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
Well, see, this is the other thing that's kind of interesting. Like, there are people out there who historically have said, especially smaller teams, like Crossplane is, what am I trying to say here? We kind of design Crossplane based on our background as being platform engineers at larger organizations, right? Where we're thinking about our customers. But we sort of designed it for bigger orgs, and it doesn't scale down super well to smaller orgs, right? So we have people come to us and just say, we're not really a platform team with platform users. We like this Kubernetes model. We'd like to have, you know, a bunch of managed resources, but we don't really need the abstraction. We're not building an abstraction for anyone. Like, we just want to use, you know, Crossplane providers to manage our own resources, right? So for those people, managed resources being cluster scoped is kind of a pain. They would rather just directly create the managed resources and put them in their namespace. So the way I'm looking at it now is that namespacing these things is kind of, you know, it has its, again, it's a trade-off. It has its downsides, but it probably makes it more useful to more people for more scenarios, sort of thing. But yeah, definitely one of the downsides is if people have just been saying you get access to any namespace resource, and now there are namespace resources in the cluster that you don't want them to have access to, then you must use RBAC to sort of more granularly allow what they can and can't do.
I don't think it really breaks everything for me. The core problem is still I have to validate every composition that I install on the cluster to make sure that namespace tenants can't trample over one another. So,
yeah, I mean, something else we could hypothetically do, I don't know if this is a good idea, but in the past versions of Crossplane, the RBAC manager, which is an optional component of Crossplane that manages sort of what permissions both Crossplane has, RBAC, like Crossplane Core has, RBAC wise, and also curates a couple of sort of global roles like Crossplane admin and Crossplane edit that are sort of convenience roles you can give people. It actually used to have a feature that tried to manage namespace roles for people. So you would sort of annotate a namespace with what types people were allowed to have, and then it would manually create roles for that namespace you could give to people. You know, I could imagine having it try and create some roles for you that gave people only composed resource access, sorry, only XR resource access and no managed resource access or something like that, or looking at ways that, you know, this could try and help out with the RBAC management burden. But it's always kind of a trade-off there because, you know, RBACs are pretty, you know, there's some folks out there who are sort of saying the same as you, that like we just, you know, we're happy giving people sort of cluster admin, but only in their namespace or star access to their namespace. And then there are other people saying, I'm not happy with the RBAC manager at all, and I want to turn it off and manually manage every, you know, people have different security positions. So it's kind of can't kind of automate it in a way that's going to work for everyone. But if we can automate it in a way that works for a lot of people, that might be worth doing.
Yeah, so I think one take. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Oh, I was just sorry. I read your yeah, last comment there, Kingdon. It's
yeah, I'm happy with the change.
yeah. You're arguing this position because I talked myself into it because the status quo is interesting, right? Because I find myself like I've been arguing that these things should be cluster scoped for years, And it's interesting, right? Like when you're sort of leading, steering a lot of architecture for a project, like I don't always have 100% confidence in these things, but it's sort of like, well, you got to have a position. So like, let's convince people of this position, which I've been doing. And over the years, my confidence in that position has like gone down and down and down. And now I've sort of said, okay, we should do the other thing. And everyone's sort of saying to me, but, and they're giving me the argument I gave them for 5 years. And I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm sort of arguing with myself by proxy.
Nice. So I think one takeaway here from the discussion, since we're getting closer to end of time here, is if there's been some really useful discussion here, it's been quite illuminating. And so if there's anything here that was in the chat or that was said out loud that that hasn't made it to feedback on the proposal itself, please do follow up everybody to add comments or to make sure that this feedback is captured in one place on the proposal. So that's my ask to everybody here is if you know something here that you want to make sure gets seen, please go ahead and also add it to the proposal in addition to the talk we've had today.
Yeah, I'm biasing on trying to get some early prototyping of some of these ideas done because I would hate to, spend a ton of time working with everyone to come to the perfect proposal and then find out that some of it wasn't possible. So so I'm intentionally, like I say, like letting some of the feedback build up while I go prototype, and then maybe in a week or so I'll jump back to this doc and start sort of diving in with everyone.
Awesome, Nick. Thanks for your efforts so far, dude.
Likewise. Well, Jared, later today, Jared's going to be working on the V2 stuff with me as well. So I was just going to say we need to start syncing up and talking about who's going to do what.
But you're making so much progress on your own so far, Nick. I don't want to slow you down. All right, folks. So Simon, I know you had one more agenda item as well. Are you still here on the call too, Simon? Do you want to talk about this?
Yes, I'm still on the call. I never imagined we would make it all the way down here. But yeah, so this is something I submitted a couple of days ago. Basically, so what I work with is I work with some people at SAP who they are basically have lots of Crossplane installations, and then they let people kind of do their thing on it. It's labeled as a bug. I think it's more of a situation where I think it's too easy to delete a Crossplane provider because we have tons of people that brick themselves very often. And currently the most common way they brick themselves essentially is they create a provider config, they delete the provider, and then you can never reinstall the same provider again because the provider config is hanging.
Just to be clear, are you saying that deleting the provider never deletes its prior provider config?
Yes. So if you can see it basically if you scroll up a bit, there's a line called case B, where it's basically I've written down all the here it is. So if you want to reproduce it, take some time. You can do it like with the dummy provider. I've written down all the commands, and you don't need to do like the patching the robot isn't even required. It's just the provider config already. Because basically what I suspect what happens is, I guess the provider is responsible for cleaning up its provider config. But if you delete the provider, the pod is already gone before it can even get to removing its Crossplane IO in-use finalizer.
Yeah, right. There's a bit of a chicken and egg thing there. We should say I need to look into this in more detail, but certainly
exactly
should be fixed.
Exactly. Take a look and don't take this as like as type of, oh, it's a bug, it's horrible, blah, blah, blah. I think it's more of a situation of it's maybe too easy to delete a provider. I've written down some thoughts down below as like food for thought. I'm happy to offer some more or like to engage in a discussion. Take a look when you have some time at this, how to reproduce it. But basically we're seeing this where, we have people, they are very confident, like it's very easy to explain to them, okay, you create a provider, then you create a resource and you're good to go. And then they think, okay, I can just delete the provider again, because that's what their knowledge, of Kubernetes consists of. And it leads them into like a really ugly deadlock situation that they can go into where they cannot install the provider afterwards again, because the old provider config is still hanging around.
Yeah, my immediate thought is I wonder if we could use like a usage or something like that. Just if we were to lean on concepts we already have, one of the use cases of a usage is to just sort of make it a little bit harder to delete something. So you at least have to find the usage and see what the usage says. So you know, a little bit more
Yeah.
block in the way.
Yeah, I think in general, and it's just food for thought, but it's also written down below, is I think what we could do is like in terms of having a webhook that at least a warns people or asks people for like, you know, put in like a confirmation, like you need to annotate your provider with delete even if dangling resources or something like this, just so that we could tell people, hey, yes, you can delete the provider right now, but this could, in your situation, lead to something pretty bad.
Yeah. Another, I hesitate to bring this up with 2 minutes left on the call, but another idea that's been bouncing around in the back of my head is there are there's a number of bugs with the sort of package manager and how it sort of, you know, installs providers, deletes providers, things like that. We've historically been pretty reluctant to have a super automated dependency management chain. This is getting a little out of scope for what you're talking about here, but it's related, I promise. You know, some folks at Upbound have been working on making it so that if you install a new version of a provider, the package manager defines like dependency conflicts. It might automatically update or automatically downgrade the dependencies of a configuration of a provider or whatever to sort of satisfy what you're asking the package manager to do. And I was having a conversation with some solutions engineers from Upbound the other day, and something that came to mind is that a lot of these things, like adding a new provider, or especially removing a provider or updating a provider, using the Crossplane package manager, the closest analog I could think of in my history as a sort of a systems administrator and software engineer to using the Crossplane package manager to install providers and upgrade providers and whatnot is like going back 20 years and thinking about using a Debian system and imagining, you know, my business is small enough that it's got 1 or 2 or 3 Debian servers running like all of our infrastructure, and I'm just taking the production one and I'm like going and running a apt-get upgrade or apt-get update on it, right, to install some kind of new package. So where my mind started to go is, can we even make it so that using a package manager to manage all the bits of Crossplane is actually going to be reliable enough that you can just go to your production machine and be like, sure, install the new version of provider or uninstall this provider, and everything's just going to work and be painless every time, right? And you know, if you look at the way that this was sold for VMs and servers, I think that people went towards the immutable infrastructure kind of pattern, right? Where instead of going to your existing server and changing the version of all the packages and doing a live upgrade and hoping it doesn't break or having an outage or, you know, planned outage or whatever, you kind of do a blue-green, you spin up a whole new server and then move everything over there, right? It's a lot harder with Crossplane because, you know, then you've got shared controllers, you know, sort of working on things. But this is where my mind started to go. It's the earliest of early threads, but, you know, maybe we're looking at this wrong by even trying to support live upgrading and downgrading and deleting and whatnot providers. And maybe we should be thinking about what if there's a way to spin up a, you know, a whole new control plane that has your new version set on it and then move stuff over there or something.
Yeah, totally. I do think that something that's interesting within this context is like a lot of people that we currently are targeting are just getting started with it. And I feel like, so they're not even thinking about upgrades or anything. They're not using it long enough. They're just like, they installed a provider, it didn't really work how they wanted. They just delete the provider. And then 3 weeks later, they think, oh, maybe I could spend some time on it again. And they reapply the provider and then bam, nothing is working. And I think that's like really frustrating to them. So yeah, this is the main thing. Like we're like far away from seamless upgrades. They have not even upgraded once any of the providers in this situation.
So I take the point that even if you're just messing around on like a development or a staging cluster or something and you're playing with Crossplane, this just gives you kind of a sour taste, a bad experience, even if it's not breaking production for you or whatever.
Yeah.
And I also wonder too, Simon and Nick, like how, if this scenario here is a cause of some of our instability in E2E tests as well, with installing providers and removing providers. I definitely see some artifacts and, you know, logs or evidence that we're waiting for a provider revision to become healthy or something like that, and the that times out because it doesn't get to a healthy state and the E2E test fails. So I wonder if this has something to do with it as well. I don't understand the full scenarios of how this happens yet. I haven't read through this issue completely,
Yeah.
but I wonder if that's impacting.
Yeah, maybe important. I will update the case B, because in the case B you don't even need like to patch the robot. Like it literally, the thing is you apply everything and then you delete the provider before deleting the provider config or even doing anything else with the provider config. I will update this in a minute, so it's nicer for you guys. I guess you guys have the full day ahead of you, right? You're on the like West Coast.
Yeah, we have our entire lives ahead of us, Simon.
Your entire lives.
But also note, Simon, I think it's super helpful. Like these reproduction steps are very helpful. So because a lot of times you get a bug gets opened and it's not really clear like how can we see this and play with it and stuff like that. So it's always really appreciated to have, hey, do this, do this, do this. I can copy and paste this and like, run into the issue too. That's really helps a lot, dude. Thank you.
Glad to have.
All right, so let's go ahead and wrap it up here then. Lots of stuff to follow up on, and we'll get the 1.19 release out next week. So yeah, and V2 is going to continue onward. Lots and lots of exciting stuff in Crossplane land. So thanks everybody for spending time with us and hanging out today, and get everyone's feedback onto the V2 proposal so we have it in one place. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.